All right. Hello.
Right. All right. Welcome to the latest episode. We're going to start off, talk about the market a little bit here. Everyone is focused on the war in the Middle East, which, in my humble opinion, is the wrong place to look. So, market sold off on Friday, then recovered almost all of it on Monday. Futures were off last night and we're off a little bit on, ostensibly Trump tweeting everyone get out of Tehran, now worried that we're going to get involved. Whether we do or we don't, I really have no idea. I certainly doubt we'll have boots on the ground. I also don't know why that is bearish for the market. Um, I think the real focus is FOMC tomorrow, or real focus should be FOMC tomorrow. They're not going to raise rates, but sorry, they're not going to lower rates, and they're not going to raise rates either. But, the question will be the commentary, a lot of people talking about the fact that given the numbers we're seeing across the board, it would make sense in a normal year for the Fed to lower. And so it's really the tariff uncertainty, the uncertainty about the war, on and on and on that may cause them not to. So, looking for clues. We're almost at the all-time highs again, you know, still with war in the Middle East, tariffs, all that stuff. Right now, the path of least resistance looks up. That can change obviously if FOMC or Powell, says something the market doesn't like. But, for now, path of least resistance is up. Jeremy, what are you seeing? Well, and I'd fade it. I shorted oil on the initial move. I closed it out, made a quick couple of bucks. Basically almost free. Everything always overreacts. I would have bought the market on Friday if it wasn't Friday. Going into a weekend, I was a little nervous because anything can happen and you can't trade. But if that had been Thursday or Wednesday, I probably would have gone long SPY Qs, something like that to fade that move. Markets always drop on a war and then recover. We saw it in Ukraine, we saw it in the Iraq wars, on and on and on and on. At the end of the day, war is actually probably bullish for stocks. So, yep. All right. So, Pat, you want to introduce our guests?
All right. Hey, guys. So I'm going to be quick. We got John Waldheim here from Rare Earth Exchange, here to talk about
Everybody.
rare earths, and Lou O'Connor from Strategic Metals, the expert in rare earths. We've heard, so that's great. I just wanted to say I think rare earth kind of crosses what we talk about, which is aerospace, renewable, semiconductors, EVs, China, tariffs, even the blockchain. These guys, have like, tokenized, way of trading, rare earths. So, John, I'm gonna have Lou make the introduction here. All right, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, cool. It's up to you, Lou.
Thank you very much, Pat. Good to be here. Good to be here with John. Just so you know, I'm coming in from Europe, and just to let you know how John is obviously in North America, as you guys are, and how I suppose I'll tell you first of all how we met is our core business. Although that's not what we're talking about today, but it's important people know what our core business is. So I suppose we wouldn't be able to have what you guys might call our side business if it wasn't for the core business. So the core business is we're an industry supplier of rare earths as well as technology metals. Um, and I mean, I guess everybody would know the rare earths have been sort of making the news a lot lately. Just last week in London, the US administration and China met, and it was all about rare earths. Um, and so on a daily basis, 85% of our business activities are we're buying these raw materials. In many cases, mostly from China. China has a sort of an unrivaled dominance in rare earths. And then we resell them to industry buyers. So we've a logistics and distribution platform where we've got more than 4,000 clients in 74 different countries. We supply metals too. Very important, I tell you, that's what we do because that's how I met John and some of the other guys there. John and the guys are, among other things, defense contractors, and they source raw materials for the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy. So I met the guys in that capacity. They have certain privileges or abilities to do certain things as ex-vets that not that civilians don't. They can sort of get over some obstacles other people can't. But the point being is they wanted to find out who we were. They wanted to do their diligence. They came to Europe. John's been to the vault in Frankfurt. Well, one of our vaults. It was a bunker in World War II, two levels below ground, one level above. We have the largest inventory of rare earths anywhere in the world outside of China. And John, took the time. That's why I'm happy to be here. Is he's one of the few who actually took the time to come to Europe and really, check out who we are and do the due diligence. Obviously, because they have a need to supply the U.S. Department of Defense and other agencies. So that's how we met, and we met establishing that we were who we were. However, what we will talk about today is what sort of evolved from there as well. So we also have a side business, or as I said, you guys in America like to call our side hustle, although it's a little bit more than a side hustle. It's grown. We also invite private investors to participate in the industry. So, and again, that's why I mentioned our core business is if we weren't embedded in the industry, if weren't in business since 1999, if we didn't have our own logistics and distribution platform, this is a very complicated, messy supply chain to try and enter, right? But it's only because of our core business then we can invite private investors to safely participate in the industry. And we offer this sort of deal where they can buy, whether it's gallium or germanium, and they can hold them just like you would, exactly the same paradigm as owning gold and silver.
Right.
And they store them. Our distribution platform, it's a duty-free zone, just like storing in Switzerland or Singapore.
Right.
So they can hold them there, and then when they went ready to liquidate, we'll mediate a sale to one of our 4,000 industry buyers, or we'll buy the raw materials. We have a practice of repurchasing for our own inventory as well. So now John and his team now have become partners with us in that realm. So on the one hand, they're looking for these raw materials for the Department of Defense, and on the other, they now have created RareX, which means they can invite private investors to buy the raw materials that they themselves, or that the US, not just the US Department. John sent me a link the other day. The CEO of Ford Motor Company mentioned they had to shut production down on some cars because of the lack of rare earths. This is because of the trade technology war that's been going on since 2018. And so these guys will be our first commercial partner in the US. And it's a very good news story for private investors. So I'll leave it at that. If there's any questions on that, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, and just so you guys know, Pat's side hustle is a Chippendale dancer. So, um,
That's why I'm broke, fellas.
what's that?
That's why I'm broke.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. So let's get back
That's funny,
for a
man.
second. And can you tell everyone what are rare earths and why should people care?
Yeah, good
Excellent.
question.
Good question, Matthew. So I suppose the thing to know about rare earths, first and foremost, is they are the backbone of manufacturing in the 21st century. So they're the what you might call the upstream raw materials that become trillions of dollars in downstream GDP. So they're critically needed and cannot be substituted in, for example, in your smartphone, there's 12 or 13 possible, depending on the model, rare earths. The same neodymium, which is in the small magnet in your speaker, is in magnets for cars, in solar, in wind. As the world sort of pivots, if you will, from oil to metals, rare earths are the new front line in geopolitical decisions. I mean, people are only beginning to hear about them because they were largely ignored or largely off the radar of institutional money, and there's a good reason for that, and it's because they only really are a small. They represent a sort of a small economic visibility in compared, say, to gold. There's a market cap of 15 to 20 billion, whereas with gold, I think 15 to 17 trillion. So they've been largely ignored by institutional money. However, we're the only industry supplier, and I can say this with certainty, that offers these raw materials to private investors. So most people don't know they can purchase them and they own them. If you just have to, it's funny enough. It was
Can I stop
President
you real
Trump's
quick?
first.
What are the denominations of these like trades? Like you could buy an ounce would be this, or 10 ounces, or a pound, or how do you, if you were a buyer,
Well,
what would be your?
sure. So they're traded, from suppliers to people like us in metric tons.
Okay.
However, they're sold in kilos. So our private investors can buy a minimum of the smallest amount would be one kilo.
So what would a
Um,
kilo of, what would be lanthanum cost you?
well, the least expensive at the moment are neodymium and praseodymium. They're only
Yeah.
like $94 and $96 per kilo.
Oh, I see.
The most expensive is gallium, I think, and germanium. Well, gallium's about $1,000 a kilo. Germanium's at about 4,500. So anywhere in
I
that
see.
area.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you can get in there for a kilo. I mean, anyone can, afford that in theory.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
got
the
room in your
minimum.
basement to store some of this stuff.
Well,
Right.
how big is a kilo? Is it like this big or is it this big? That really depends. You know what I mean?
First one.
All right. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
about
it's
this
a little
big. All
smaller.
right.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Cool.
Well, it's important. For private investors, obviously, we have to, invite them in with lower amounts. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense.
Right.
Our minimum investment purchase is only $10,000, but
I
you
see.
know, people are
And then you
buying it.
store it, right? And then how much is the storage fee? Is there one?
Yeah, there's a storage fee depending on the metal because we sell metals in bar form, in oxide, which is the powder, in nitrate, in liquid.
Oh,
But to
right.
private investors, we only offer in either oxide or bars. But the annual storage fee is either 1% or can be up to 2%, depending. Some of them need certain conditions, for chain of custody and stuff like that.
So it'd be $100 if you put in 100 or 200 if you put in 10 grand is what you're saying? Basically, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Cool.
Exactly.
So then, let's talk some more about supply and demand then. So obviously you answered the question why we care because they're in everything. Where do you find these? So I know, this whole Ukraine-Russia war, there's all this talk of, hey, we want rare earths from Ukraine. do we not have enough here? You know, and if not, where, I mean, are we getting them from China? Are we getting them from somewhere else? Where do we find this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great insight, Matthew. So, despite the name, rare earths are not always that rare.
Okay.
And
That's a misnomer.
there is a mine in the US. It's MP Minerals, Mountain Pass in California. However, and this is where it gets really very interesting, MP in California still sell most of the raw materials they mine to China for processing. This is where it gets interesting. The human expertise or the engineering expertise for processing these raw materials does not exist in the US or Europe. I'm only talking about the US because you guys are in North America, but Europe is in exactly the same position. And what happened in the last generation, I suppose, when we, at one point, the US, Mountain Pass in California, was the largest producer of rare earths. And really, two things happened going back now 30 years ago. In fact, you could Google and you would see that the premier of China, Deng Xiaoping, who's now considered the architect of modern China, he was standing on a mine in China, rare earth mine, and he said, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. And that was a very, very shrewd prediction. So that's the first thing that happened is China sort of understood before Europe and before North America how important they were going to become in the 21st century. The second thing that happened was both, the US and Europe, when we were high, if you will, on the globalization drug, allowed it to happen. We thought, the Chinese can produce them for less money. It's a bit sloppy. It's a bit messy. We don't want it in our backyard. We'll just let the Chinese do this and we will buy them these raw materials inexpensively from China. Turns out now that wasn't the best idea. And China now is in a position, which they have done, if they have weaponized rare earths. And that's why these sort of meetings were hastily gathered just last week in London is everywhere. But just to answer your question, Matthew, the reason that's complicated as well is rare earths are not they don't occur naturally in the Earth's crust. So they're always a byproduct of another raw material. And the processing of that, so it's more of a metallurgical process than mining. So when they're extracted, they have to be separated. They have to be extracted, separated, and then remetallized to purity levels of, maybe 99.999% if they're going into the engine of an F-35 fighter jet. So China is about a generation ahead of the rest of the world in the processing. And there isn't one facility in North America that can do that processing as of now, but that will change over the next few years.
So it's not geology in China then, right? They don't have like the special, geology that they have the metals there. They do the processing. Is that what you're saying? Because that's what it sounds like.
It's a bit of both, Pat. China has about 50% of the world's reserves.
I see.
But they also have the process and technology. I'll give you some context. China's about 39 universities graduating degrees in metallurgy for the last 30 years. So the Chinese have been graduating about 200 metallurgists a week, every week for the last 30 years. There's about 400,000 metallurgists in China. Maybe there's 400 in North America and a similar amount in Europe. So the engineering expertise does not exist at the moment. Now, China is also the largest importer of these raw materials. From Myanmar, from Africa, from California, Mountain Pass. So they're the largest sort of producer, importer, and exporter.
Okay, so let me ask one more question. Is it a messy process? Because like in California, we're shutting down oil refineries.
Right, that's the EPA question.
Yes,
yes,
it is considered. It's cleaner than it used to be. China has certainly cleaned it up. They've really sort of consolidated the industry, but that's sort of why Europe and the US didn't want to mess with it. It can be. Yeah.
You got it. All right.
So you say for now, I mean, it seems like with Trump in the White House, he wants to bring a lot of this stuff back. It seems like there won't be as much push on the environmental, at least from a federal government standpoint. And it seems like bringing this, refining process to the US is strategically really important. So what's your sense on, how long it's going to take, when we might see that coming back here, if in our lifetimes?
Yeah, I suppose mining's it's a bit like farming, the kids don't want to do it anymore. So they're, my understanding is there's 100,000 people employed in mining in North America, and half of them will retire by 2030, and they're not being replaced. Um, the average time from maiden discovery to it being in a product in the US is 29 years. Now, I don't think it's going to take that long, but you're looking at 15 to 20 years. Because like you said, there are like there's I had a conversation with a lady from a university in Utah 2 weeks ago, and she was telling me there's 500,000 abandoned coal mines in the US, and they have
Right.
mine tailings, they have rare earths, but they don't have the capacity or the capability to do the processing and the remetallizing of the product. So it will take time. That's why President Trump, would use them maybe as leverage to end the Russia war. I mean, when he's talking about Greenland, he's talking about those resources as well. But most politicians don't understand resource economics, and it's naive to think it'll be solved in 5 years. We're looking 10, 15 years, maybe longer.
Yeah,
So
everything's-
even if we get a deal with Ukraine where we get a lot of rare earth, we still can't process it. So
Exactly, Matthew. And I think, look, that's just for optics. I think, it just looks good in the newspapers because
yeah,
one,
okay.
mining, you need a lot of infrastructure, and Ukraine as a country, the normal infrastructure isn't even there. Never mind the mining infrastructure. And then, of course, the surveys they're using there are Soviet era surveys. So they're 40 years old. At that time, rare earths weren't that important. So I would say, and most people in the industry would say, there's very little rare earths in Ukraine. Now, there's probably some, but there's base metals which might be important. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. That's just good, looks good, shaking hands, and we've got a deal, and we're going to get even Greenland. I mean, Greenland is ice. That's not going to be easy to put
Right.
in the infrastructure and mine.
But so that's interesting. So are you implying that a lot of Trump's interest in Greenland is because they have rare earth there? Because it
Yes.
doesn't seem to make a lot of sense why he'd want a big block of ice.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. It's resources, and rare earths are a part of that. Although there's probably, and strategically, geographically, there is it. It is a good position. But yeah, it's the resources. But
Is there anywhere else but China where they can process this stuff?
Yeah, that was my
Where
question
they're
too.
closer to
at the
processing?
moment, the second largest producer after China is Linus Corp in Australia, and they've actually done a deal, and I think this is under construction already
That's LYSCF.
with the U.S. Department of Defense, and they're building a processing facility in the US. My understanding is, and I'm open to correction, I could be a bit out of date, but both MP Materials, who we spoke about from California, and Linus, in cooperation with US Department of Defense, are building processing facilities in the US. However, I saw the CEO of MP on CNBC less than a month ago, and if I'm paraphrasing, but what I gathered he said was, even when their facility in the US is up and running, it'll only deliver about 1% of the demand that's
Right.
needed in the
And when will
US.
that be? Like, when will that be up and running?
I think they may be up and running, but they're not at full capacity, or they're very close to it anyway. And MP Materials would be the most innovative and advanced in North America. That mine has always been there producing.
Is
So 1%
Linus
is like oh, go ahead, man. Sorry.
processing anything in Australia?
Yes, well, actually, I think they've a facility in Indonesia, maybe not in
Okay.
Australia, if memory serves.
So 1% is like a drop in the bucket. That's not going to move any markets, obviously, is what you're saying, right?
No, we as a on the industry side, and this is why, and I'm going to let John come in now to
Oh
let you
yeah.
know what
Okay. Cool.
he's doing in North America, because this is why they're very, very interesting to private investors. Is there's not only sort of scarcity driven price hikes, but we envision between now and 2035, 2040, there will be periods where there's just no raw materials available. I'll just give you an example. In the last, say, 2 months, China restricted the export of 7 rare earths in retaliation for the tariffs that the Trump administration announced. Out of those 7, 2 of them we recommend as relevant as physical assets. So the prices for those 2 went up immediately, 30, 40, 50%. They've now sort of doubled. So the reason it's such a good investment, and I let John step in now, is every now and again we have scarcity driven price hikes, and I'll let John, he'll probably tell you about terbium during COVID and then hafnium and stuff like that. But I'm going to sign off now,
All right.
gentlemen, and let John step in. And
Thank you,
thanks
Lou.
very much for having me on.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Lewis, thank you
Pleasure.
so much for standing by, sir. I appreciate your help.
You are the
You're very,
expert.
very welcome. All the best, gentlemen.
You too.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Later.
Going back to the government side and all the things that they've been doing, the Department of Energy has a program called Manufacturing, Engineering, and Supply Chain, MESC. And they have funded close to $50 billion to 48 companies since 2020. And that's particular to pulling them from waste streams. So the government's been aware of what's been happening. We're just way behind.
Well, all right. So, John, let's start over here. Okay. So, this is John Waldheim. He's the CEO of Rare Earth, right? So,
Sure.
you have like an online marketplace. You're trying to develop an online marketplace for these rare earths, correct? And
That is correct.
you have a kind of a tokenized way to track these things, et cetera. And then can you talk about that a little bit? And then you also, I'm just going to bring it up now. You also were a Navy SEAL, so you were in this version
Oh.
Bravo like program, right? You were.
I personally am not a SEAL. I was logistics tech. Both my
But
partners, Arthur and Spencer, were both SEALs. Yeah.
and so there's the version Bravo program, right? Can you talk about that a little bit too? So talk about yourself and then the version Bravo thing.
Yeah. So we are a U.S.-based defense contractor. We've been in business 8 years, particularly to commodity space. I've got active contracts in fuel and chemicals. And so, realizing the shortfalls in what's been happening in the defense industry, we realized that this space, we were working with companies that were actually trying to extract this from wastewater out of Pennsylvania. And so this company, Encotech, which is a wastewater treatment company, had designed a system for a company called Seneca. It was a wastewater, Seneca is a publicly traded utility. And so they had developed a wastewater treatment system in the Marcellus Shale in a place called 7 Mile. And so in looking at that system, they're able to run around 7,500 barrels a day, from what I understand, and they can extract strontium. And the US hasn't produced strontium in probably 60 years.
Yeah.
We use strontium for fireworks, ammunition, red flares. And so looking at that system and trying to raise capital to expand it, we determined that, looking at this industry and all the problems and the geopolitical issues that were happening, that we wanted to enter the space. And so we decided to go and start to look in joining into the rare earth supply chain. And that's where I met Lewis. We went through a long DD, and from there we got our accounting open. And so today, like Lewis had said, we're the first company that can help retail investors invest into the rare earth supply chain. So as it stands, if you were to do that today, the way it looks is like this. We get you with advisors from our partners in Europe. We walk through what the historical values have done over the last 5 to 6 years. You choose what you feel is the best, recommended investment for you. And then they'll send you a commercial invoice. You pay that fee. Then you once they receive the transfer, you get an automatic certificate of ownership and certificate of storage. And we recommend that you hold the investment for a year. So I can stop there if you guys have any questions, and we can.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I get the supply demand equation now. And one way for investors to obviously participate is your marketplace. How many public companies are there in this space as well? So we talked about, MT and Linus. Are there others that you know of that are in this space?
Not in the direct one for one. Like you would find it very hard pressed to find an ability to invest into rare earth supply chain as a physical commodity. Right now, you can do mining ETFs.
Right.
If you search any kind of cryptocurrency play that would be an associated, to this, that's about what we got. So we're going to be the first North American marketplace where you'll be able to buy and invest and trade all in one platform in the US.
Wow. All right.
So it'll be like the
Yeah, and it looks
equivalent of,
like MP is taken off.
yeah, I was
So, I
watching
mean,
it.
there are, okay, just to answer that question, I mean, we discussed this earlier. There are a list of names. I don't know if it's worth going into, but there are a list of small players in the industry, but I don't think there are any, big market cap names in this space, it
Well,
seems.
but I mean, we don't need big market cap
Okay,
names.
ILKAF. Let's start with that. ILKAF. No, excuse me. Iluka Resources. ILKAF.
Uh,
You can't get that one? I think maybe it was it's ILUKA Resources.
Oh,
Yep.
here.
Yeah, so that really doesn't trade. And we talked about UUUU, which was Energy Fuels, which is uranium, but also in theory is rare earth processing, right?
Interesting. I did not know. I mean, this is a name I'm familiar with,
yeah.
but didn't know they also did some rare earth stuff.
There's also Neo Performance Metals, Nancy Oscar Peter Mary Frank, NOPMF. That's one, all taken off apparently. And then there's ARAFF, Arafura Rare Earths. Got that one. And then there's Rare Element
Jeremy, your favorite, a penny stock.
Rare Earth Element
I got a better one.
Resources. This is REEMF. High Symmetry, Washington, Wyoming Deposit Speculative Play. And then there's Texas Mineral Resources, TMRC. And then there's one more here, I guess. Vital Metals, VTMXF, Canadian based, blah blah blah.
All right. So I'm not feeling an ETF in here.
Yeah, right. So John, like, how do you? I'm going to go through this list of questions I had here. So, what differentiates you guys from other players in the rare earth metals industry? Like, what do you guys do, and like how you're obviously you just said it, but maybe you can reiterate on it, I guess.
Yeah, so RareEarthX today, like I said, with what's happened geopolitically, all of our inventory is already sitting outside of China. So when Trump tweets something and China gets upset and they close the doors to germanium or gallium or antimony, like in
Right.
November, the second that they shut the door, antimony jumped 40%. So the process by which we trade today, like I said, it's a little bit laborious. And so we decided to create a marketplace that can kind of sort of speed up the process. Instead of taking, a 2-week process to go through the discovery, the purchase, the trade, and the holding, we can do that. It's almost instantaneous.
Got it.
So
Okay.
yeah.
So you guys also brought up the word supply chain, like so. Is that important here, or are you guys just buying out of these strategic mineral guys' vault, or is there supply chain issues? Or let's say I wanted to buy something from you guys, whatever your problem, like, oh, we don't have that one or anything like that.
So we do have the top list of metals. There's a lot of scarcity right now, especially in oxide. But as of right now, yeah, and we would recommend that you buy and we would hold the asset. You don't want to break the chain of custody, right? That's the most important thing here. So one, you have the retail investment side, but there's a piece of this when we do the buyback. We'll canvas our sellers that are part of the 4,000 strategic buyers and manufacturers of products that will take this off our hands. So yes, it's a scarcity issue, but again, we do have stocks sitting outside of China that we have access to, and as a defense contractor, our biggest thing was to help strengthen the U.S. supply chain. Everybody's looking at pulling these out of the, either the waste streams or mining them, but where are they all going to go and who needs them and how do we get them to them? And the companies that are starting to get into the tech for, advanced AI and data centers, anything that you touch technology wise, we're going to need these things. That's why the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and the Department of State, consider these to be of national security.
So your company, you're not only, a marketplace where like guys like us could say, hey, I want to invest in whatever. You're also a supplier to, companies who are using these rare earths as well, which
Yes,
I would
sir.
assume is, and correct me if I'm wrong, more what you're interested in. You don't want to sell 1 kilogram to Pat. You want to sell a ton to like Raytheon.
Well, that's what's good about our business. We have separate verticals. So if you think of Microsoft, Microsoft has a commercial division and they have a government division. So with Rare Earth Exchange, we're kind of the same play. We've got our defense industry business where we can sell directly into what they call AMPs or our strategic reserve. You can go directly, and because we're disabled veterans, we can register as a diversity supplier with the likes of Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. We use the government business and the commercial straight business for manufacturing as a backstop to our investment one for one for the retail side.
Right. Okay. So let me ask you a question. So you talk about blockchain, and are you able to tokenize any of this stuff yet?
Not yet. That's our phase two. So right now, once we launch the beta for Rare Earth Exchange, then the whole blockchain is so we can imprint to the blockchain and create that immutable record. Nobody, you can't mess with it. So when you own it, and we've got recorded proof of it.
So Matt, I can ask you a question. So like, is this something that you could create like a ETF out of, like, rare earths, metal ETF, not a stock ETF, but like the, gold ETF? Could you create a rare, you get the question.
Was that for me or for Matthew?
Matt, I think, is Matt there? Did Matt just fade out? I think we
Oh
just lost
no,
Matt.
we
That was
lost
weird.
that.
No,
Lost him.
dude, I just noticed it. Okay, no,
Ah.
that was for Matt. So let me ask you a question, John. Well, Matt will come back. So, do
Sure.
you have like, so when we talk about like data, right? So I'm your customer, and I'm like, all right. So do you have charts? Like Jeremy likes charts. Do you have any other
Sure.
kind of data, like price points? This is the
Let's go.
historical on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to, if you can bring up a web page, go to Strategic Metals Invest. Let's go to Lewis's.
Can you do that, Jeremy? Now?
If it'll let
If
me
not,
share.
I can try to do it for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. If you could do a screen share, that might be good. We lost Matt.
Okay.
He's the one that usually does that. We all can have.
Sure.
Oh, here.
Here he comes.
Let me.
No,
I'll bring
that's
it
not
up.
him though.
We'll
That's
bring it up,
Nope, that's not
him.
and let me bring it up here. I'll show you.
I'm trying to also adapt the output feed here.
yeah,
So
yeah. That's Matt. That's
when
weird.
things change suddenly, I got to deal with that.
So
Okay.
this is Strategic Metals Invest.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
his
Please,
website.
please. Yeah.
So we can go through. Let's see what he's got on the charting. Oh,
Oh, I see.
Let me get that centered.
Oh,
Technical
I got it.
difficulties.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So it's out here.
Yeah, so we can go all the way back 2012. That's the data that we have on basically all the metals.
So I'm gonna just, since Matt's not here, I'm just gonna like kind of speak for him a little bit. So let's assume that you could like put this stuff in ETF. Could you go out and buy, $100,000 worth of this stuff today without, moving the market, or 1 million, or, I know that it trades in kilograms, but what would be like a, institutional lot size that you could probably fill? If that's even a reasonable question to ask you.
I would say we could comfortably buy between 5 and 10 million.
A day, or a total a week, or like a month, or
I
what
would
that
say
be?
probably per
Here's-
week. We can
Per
go
week.
total of 10 to up to 10 million per week. They do have a very large supply. Like Lewis had stated, I was able to visit the vaults, and the vault is a considerable location. I mean, it's every bit of 200,000 square feet, 4 levels. It's got 3 feet to 4 feet thick walls. It was an old 1930s bomb bunker that's sitting in the middle of Frankfurt, Germany. And it's in a very unassuming location. But it's quite large, and they're sitting on a lot of inventory, quite a lot.
So Matt, I just asked you a question before you faded out. So
Yeah.
could you do this stuff in an ETF, like a gold ETF, like a gold ETF, not the stocks, but the commodities? He said you could trade 5 to 10 million of the stuff a week or something. Is that not even enough? Or
No, I mean, not at this point. There are some physical gold ETFs, but because the gold market is so large, you're able to do that and have enough liquidity. I can't see how at this point you can do an ETF on this stuff. I'm just hoping John's company decides to come public through a SPAC merger.
right,
There you go. There you go.
Then we'll play it that way.
right, yeah, okay, that's a good point. That's a
That'd be
good point.
ideal. There's already an
So-
ETF for that.
So what's version Bravo, John? He didn't bring that up. So what is version
Oh.
Bravo?
That was Version Bravo is a 10-week accelerator course for companies that are SEAL led. And when I say SEAL led, it could be Navy SEAL or it could be H.E.A.T 13, which is their Israeli equivalent.
I see.
And so it was a business accelerator. What they noticed was that these guys that had served their time, out of the box thinkers, very aggressive, very smart and dangerous, decided that this program would be great to kind of take those skills and put them towards business. So the accelerator program is just that. It's a 10-week program. Well, you start 2 weeks and you go to Israel. I was just in Tel Aviv
I see.
to see all of this happening. It's quite surreal because that trip,
All right.
never been to Tel Aviv or been to Jerusalem, and anything about the Bible, that it really brings it to life.
Yeah.
Very emotional, growing up, hearing the stories of Christ and my grandparents always pushing that agenda, and then getting to see it come to life was pretty special. And
Right.
my heart goes to Israel today as they're dealing with this stuff. So
Right. Huh. Yeah,
That's a
I've
bucket
spent a lot
list
of
trip
time
for
in
me.
Israel myself. Huh. All right. So, Matt, you have any questions? Because I have some, but Jeremy, you must have a few. You always have a ton. So go for it, Jack.
I've got a couple if I can let my nerd out a little bit. And first, I got to kind of maybe see if there's another question towards Matt. So,
Yeah, man.
if asset tokenization's involved, I mean, couldn't there be what faded out here? Oh, the screen share. So couldn't there be like let me get the screen going here. Sorry.
Eventually, we don't have tokenization in ETFs yet.
Right. But I mean, it could be like even not a derivative based ETF, but I'm trying to think of the word for it. So if it's on blockchain, it can be done on the same way you would do like your 2x long ETF on Bitcoin and so forth. Similarly, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, not yet. The technology doesn't exist.
Gotcha.
Right now you'd need some public companies, you'd need liquid futures markets. So, there was a lithium futures ETF. They had to shut it down. But, the lithium futures market was liquid enough.
Right.
So if there were liquid futures markets on this stuff, but I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I highly doubt that there are.
It has to have the leverage. And liquidity is required. The other side of it is I know there's several mining companies that are U.S. traded, or U.S. owned and U.S. Traded, obviously. One of them I texted you, UAMY there. I know that most of their rare earth mines are down in Mexico, but it's still a U.S. company out of Great Falls, Montana. In a sense, a lot of the other local companies that mine different rare earth compounds are kind of hamstrung by being able to refine the goods into a usable product, or at least a way to store a purified product. And I know EPA kind of spells out a lot of what to be expected for prolonging permitting process, not only for new mining, but for existing mining to go into refinement as well. There's another story I remember back in 2018. I started getting really into some of these smaller mining companies who are developing technology to process, gold and silver ore, specifically the one I was looking at, a little more efficiently. as well as being able to go through toxic tailings, whether they were processed with mercury or processed with arsenic, and able to extract more precious metals from those tailings, as well as recover the mercury and recover the arsenic. I wonder if that technology is kind of in step with leading towards a solution to where we can efficiently and environmentally safely process these in the U.S. eventually. What does that outlook look like?
They're working on it now. I mean, they've been working, the DOE's been pushing a lot of grants through that MESC program I mentioned earlier to, to look at not only waste streams because of the process that it is a dirty process. A lot of the wastewater companies will be very, I would say, kind of look to create, better media like from Dow Chemical that can help separate out and clean up not only the wastewater but also extract the metals. And there's companies that are doing it. It's just not at a point where it's commercially viable. University of West Virginia established, and they're processing rare earth metals today. They've got several coal mining waste stream lakes that they've been trying to clean up in the state. And they just can't, without federal funding, they're underwater. It's not commercially viable. So that's in short the problem today. It's 100% the refinement.
Right, and the expenses involved. A while back, I traded two companies involved. One of them was Itronics, long since delisted, and they developed a CAMTHEO process in which they could, separate the mercury and extra gold and silver out of tailings, and then the leftover material was sold as potting soil, quite literally, very nutrient-rich potting soil. And another company that kind of adopted that, and I actually called and talked to the CEO himself and asked him the question and said, "Hey, I see you guys are forming a partnership with this other company that's developed this process. Are you taking this further into being able to refine and even extract and clean up, other mining waste in Nevada, for instance, for all the mercury that goes into the river up there? Holy smokes!" And he said, "Yeah, we're actually partnered in developing something small scale first to develop the technology, and then large scale later is to go and clean up the mess as well as recover metals and making it economically viable to do so." Can we see a similar situation for rare earth materials in the future as well?
Yeah, they're like I said, they're currently working on it. Lewis had mentioned coal. I'm from West Virginia, so coal mining is in my blood.
Virginia,
And so it's, what we found through a lot of analysis is that the rare earth metals are often encapsulated in the carbon chain.
right.
And so again, removing that on the refinement side and the metallurgy is extremely critical. We've got plenty of the resources. We just need to develop the technologies that will better get it out of get it out.
So Lou, you made it back, huh?
I did. I don't have the same security clearance as John, so I have to.
All right. So look, I'm going to ask you a question, right? Since you're back. So I want to go off a list here. What is your vision for the future of the rare earth metal sector? What do you think will be the key trends over the next decade?
Fairly obvious, Pat, that you're coming off of a list, by the way.
Yep.
I usually
That
don't.
was not an organic question.
I usually don't. I purposely made it sound like it was inorganic, so you would know how official the question was.
Yeah.
Well,
Like the future. I could say, what's the future, man? I could say, put it like that. Want me to do that next time?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, nobody can obviously predict the future, but I don't think anybody would argue that demand for these raw materials is going to increase. I mean, we're certain of it. I mean, they are now, as I think I said earlier, we're pivoting sort of from oil to metals, and these are the new front line in geopolitical decisions. I mean, artificial intelligence, sure, it runs on data, but it relies on rare earths, for magnets, for computer chips, for sensors that power the servers, robotics, wherever you look, they will be needed. Until now, the rare earths have been large, from a private investor point of view, they've been largely ignored or off the radar of institutional money. There's a good reason for that. They have a low economic visibility. will, at the moment, and I know this, I can say this with certainty, we're the only supplier who actually invites in private investors at the moment. That may well change. John and his team will be, the only team in North America that have access to these physical assets. In terms of the industry, we definitely envision supply bottlenecks. One of the most important things to us is to have an inventory. That's why we invite private investors, because they help us build an inventory. Because right at the moment, actually, though we mentioned earlier, dysprosium and terbium, no dysprosium or terbium have left China since April the 4th. And they've gone up 30%, 40%. I think they've even doubled now in the space of 6 weeks. So these are the benefits to private investors, but these are the challenges to manufacturers. But the good news is when the prices spike, for example, Apple will pay a 50 or 100% increase, and long before they'll allow, it's too catastrophic for the production of the iPhone to shut down when there's a shortage of rare earths. So, Apple or any manufacturer will just absorb the price increase just because they need the raw material. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot happening, a lot going on. I suppose you could say the big change I see coming is that the demand, not just that the demand is rising, but demand is being sort of institutionalized by national interests. So we have strategic stockpiling, again, as we pivot to metals being at the forefront or the front line of all these sort of geopolitical decision making. So definitely they're becoming more and more important.
All right, another question. So do you ever talk to the LME or the CME or any of these guys?
Say that again, sorry.
Do you ever talk to like the LME, the London Metals Exchange, or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or whoever trades this stuff? What do they say about this? Do you ever talk to them? Is there any thoughts of ever being futures markets on these things?
Well, we do. I mean, our expertise, if you will, is technology metals and rare earths, but we do offer as well precious metals. So we sort
I
of
see.
everything is divided up with people who sort of specialize in one metal almost. But there's probably not enough of an economic visibility for them to be, they're just at the moment it's just purely supply and demand driven. Maybe that will change in the future, but yeah, we'd be members
I see.
of stuff like that. Yeah.
So you're already in those spots. So you would know if it was going to work, obviously. All right, one last question for me here. So this is a little off the cuff, but this is something that I just want to ask. So, what leadership principles guide you in running a company that's such a specialized and high stakes industry? I mean, you guys are in some pretty crazy spots. So, is there some overriding strategy that you have, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I just play. I mean, I just play a small part of it. I work on the private investor side. Where I'm one of 45, 50 people, part of the organization. Talking with sort of Matthias, like the founder on the industry side,
Yep.
I would say, sort of their core principle, and that has worked very well, is to sort of to grow very, very slowly. I know that sounds like maybe the opposite, but to be very, very careful. I mean, again, the chain of custody is so important with these raw materials. They could be in a nuclear submarine, they could be in a jet engine, they could be in a fighter jet. So his goal was, they started small 25 years ago. They started just with rare earths, then they moved up to technology metals, eventually to precious metals. But it's this type of industry. I'd say one of the principles is people normally say, don't just sit there, do something. Well, in this industry, you need to just sit there, don't just do something, sit there and analyze and be careful. You have to be really careful with the supply chain, with the chain of custody.
Right. Because you're saying you could just get crappy stuff, fake stuff from
Yeah,
weird
there was
places.
once upon a time in the 80s there were rogue mines in China. There was about 3,000 mines.
Oh, I
China
see.
decided to consolidate that industry. Today there's two main companies. So they went from thousands in the 80s to hundreds in the 90s to maybe 100 and something in the early noughties or the 2000s to in 2015 we had what we call the big six. And
Oh,
as
I
of
see.
18 months ago, there's only two. So they've slowly, there was even still today, there might be some smuggling of these raw materials outside of China. But for example, I'll just make a point, Pat. If you buy raw materials from us, these raw materials sit in the vault in the original packaging from the producer. And they will always, even though you own them, they'll always remain in the original packaging, because whether it's Apple or Siemens or BMW or Ford, they will not buy raw materials, even from us, if they're not in the original packaging from the producer, because the chain of custody is so important. I mean, Boeing or Airbus. I mean, Boeing recently had some issues with some of the engines, and they were looking at the quality of the parts and the raw material. So nobody will touch anything we sell unless the chain of custody is fully intact. So that's the difference, obviously, between gold. You can buy and sell gold quite easily. With these raw materials, you need to be a part of the industry.
Quality control.
Strategic
quality control.
Well, we're running up to our little spot here. But we'd love to have you guys on again, like 6 months or a year if things change up. Why don't we have them back on, Matt? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, once this marketplace starts to expand, gets really investable, you're talking about getting in on, the ground floor of something.
Yeah.
Definitely interesting.
I compare it to back in oil days, back with Rockefeller and everybody getting in on that ground floor. This is kind of seeming like the next step as far as things the world needs.
100%. We're not going backwards in technology, that's for sure.
Nope.
So.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Right, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Appreciate your time.
Appreciate all the
Thanks
likes.
indeed, gentlemen. Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.